The $3 coffee is not your problem. This is, someone told you this cup of coffee is why you're broke. I want to talk about that. Not the coffee, the advice. Because I think the advice is one of the most insidious pieces of financial guidance ever sold. I want to show you exactly why, with math, with data, and with the history of where that advice actually came from and who it was designed to benefit. But before we get there, I want to sit for a moment with the feeling that advice creates. Because I think you know the feeling I'm talking about. You're in line at a coffee shop, or maybe you're buying lunch, or getting a drink at the end of a hard week, and there's a voice in the back of your head. Sometimes it's your own voice. Sometimes it's a financial influencer you watched at 2 in the morning when you couldn't sleep because you were anxious about money. The voice says, you shouldn't be doing this. You can't afford this. Every dollar you spend here is a dollar you're stealing from your future self, and you feel it. This low, persistent guilt that wraps itself around the simplest pleasures and makes them feel irresponsible. That guilt is not accidental. It was manufactured, it was designed, packaged, and sold to you. And today I want to trace exactly where it came from, why it persists, and most importantly, why it is mathematically, demonstrably wrong as a framework for understanding your financial situation. Now I want to be careful here, because I am not about to tell you that spending is fine and you should never think about where your money goes. That would be irresponsible in the other direction. What I am going to argue, and I'm going to prove it, is that the framing of small discretionary spending as the primary obstacle to financial security is a distraction, and not a neutral one. It is a distraction that serves specific economic interests, that has been embraced by a specific industry, and that has caused real harm to real people who internalized its logic and spent years monitoring their coffee orders while the structural forces actually determining their financial fate went completely unexamined. So let's talk about coffee, and then let's talk about what's actually happening. The story starts in 1999. A financial author named David Bach published a book called Smart Women Finish Rich. In that book, he introduced what he called the Latte Factor. The core argument was elegant in its simplicity. If you're buying a coffee every day, and that coffee costs $3 to $5, and you invested that money instead, you would retire with hundreds of thousands of dollars more than you otherwise would. The math was technically correct. The implication was that the coffee, the daily, small, pleasurable habit, was a meaningful obstacle to financial security, and that if you could conquer it, you were on your way. The concept exploded. It became a cultural shorthand. Avocado toast. Streaming subscriptions, restaurants. Every small expenditure became a vessel for the same moral argument. You are spending on pleasures when you should be saving for your future, and your failure to do so explains why you're struggling. The argument was everywhere. It still is. And it has been swallowed whole by an enormous number of people who are genuinely trying to do the right thing with their finances. The problem is that the argument is built on a foundation that collapses completely when you introduce the actual numbers of what has happened to the American economy over the last 40 years. And that's where we're going next. The math, the Latte Factor versus the structural cost fallacy. Let's do the math that David Bach did, and then let's do the math he didn't do. Because one without the other is not financial education. It's a magic trick. Bach's calculation, $5 a day on coffee, multiplied by 365 days, equals $1,825 per year. Invested at a 7% annual return over 40 years, that becomes approximately $262,000. That is a real number. If you invest $1,825 per year for 40 years at 7%, you get approximately that amount. Bach was not lying about the math. He was lying about the implication. Here's the math he didn't do. Since 1980, the median American home price has increased from approximately $64,000 to over $400,000. That is a 525% increase. In the same period, overall inflation was approximately 300%. Housing did not merely keep pace with inflation. It obliterated it. In major metropolitan areas, the places where most jobs actually exist, median home prices are $600,000, $800,000, $1.2 million. The gap between what housing costs and what wages provide has not narrowed. It has become a canyon. Now let's look at healthcare. In 1980, the average American household spent approximately 5% of its income on healthcare. Today, that number is closer to 11%. And for households without employer-sponsored insurance, it is far higher. A single hospitalization in the United States, a single event, has a median cost of over $13,000 before insurance. The average deductible for employer-sponsored health insurance has gone from under $500 in 2003 to over $1,600 today. And that's before copays, out-of-network charges, and the pharmaceutical costs that are priced at levels that would be illegal in every other wealthy country. Let's look at education. In 1980, 4 years of tuition at a public university cost approximately $1,200 per year in inflation-adjusted dollars. Today, it costs approximately $10,000 per year, and that's before room, board, and fees, which push the real number to $26,000 or more at many schools. The student loan crisis is not a crisis of undisciplined spending on lattes. It is a crisis of a system that sold an entire generation the idea that education was an investment, while quietly repricing that investment beyond the reach of the wages it was supposed to unlock. So let's put these numbers together. The Latte Factor, applied with perfect discipline over 40 years, saves approximately $262,000. The increase in housing costs beyond inflation, the increase in healthcare beyond inflation, and the increase in education beyond inflation collectively add up to an exposure that for a median income American household runs into the hundreds of thousands of dollars over a working lifetime. The latte is not winning this fight. It was never in the same weight class. There's another piece of this math that rarely gets discussed, and it matters enormously. The Latte Factor assumes that the money saved from cutting the coffee is available for investment. But for the bottom 60% of American income earners, fixed costs, rent, utilities, insurance premiums, minimum debt payments, and transportation consume between 75 and 90% of take-home income. What remains is not discretionary. It is the margin on which everything else, food, clothing, medicine, car repairs, and yes, the occasional coffee, must operate. When you are already at that compression, saving the latte money does not produce an investable surplus. It produces a slightly less desperate scramble through the rest of the month. The financial advice industry knows this, or it should. The math is not obscure. What is obscure is the reason why the industry keeps returning to small discretionary spending as the primary variable in personal financial outcomes, even when the data makes clear that structural costs are the dominant factor. And that brings us to the system. The system, why the latte myth persists and who it serves. The Latte Factor did not survive for 25 years because it is true. Ideas that are merely true do not survive that long without institutional support. The Latte Factor survived because it is useful, not to you, but to several industries that have a direct financial interest in where you direct your attention when thinking about money. The first industry is the personal finance publishing and media industry itself. Books, podcasts, YouTube channels, financial blogs, and budgeting apps are all products. They are sold to people who are anxious about money. And the frame that best sustains that anxiety, and best sustains the market for products that promise to relieve it, is the frame that says your financial situation is primarily the result of your habits and choices. Because if the problem is your habits, the solution is a product that helps you fix your habits. A budgeting app, a savings challenge, a book about the psychology of spending. These products exist and are sold at scale because the behavioral frame makes them necessary. If the problem were instead structural, If wages are too low and housing is too expensive and healthcare is inaccessible, there is no product to sell you. The solution would be political, not commercial. And political solutions do not generate subscription revenue. The second industry is the investment and financial services industry. This is the industry that stands to benefit most directly from the Latte Factor's core prescription. Stop spending small amounts of money and invest them instead. Every dollar redirected from consumption to investment is a dollar that enters the financial system and generates fees, management costs, and transaction revenue for financial institutions. The Latte Factor is, at its structural core, a marketing argument for investment products. It is dressed up in the language of personal empowerment and financial wisdom, but its functional purpose is to move money from your spending into the financial system. And the financial system benefits enormously from that movement. The third mechanism is more psychological than institutional, connecting to a concept in cognitive science, the fundamental attribution error. This is the tendency to explain outcomes by individual character and choice, rather than situational and structural factors. When we see someone struggling financially, this error inclines us to ask what they did wrong, not what system they are operating inside. This bias is not politically neutral. It protects existing structures by relocating accountability at the individual level. It is the cognitive foundation on which the entire behavioral finance advice genre rests. The Latte Factor is a perfect expression of the fundamental attribution error applied to economics. It says, your financial difficulty is a function of your choices. Your choices can be changed. Therefore, your financial difficulty can be solved through better choices. At each step, the logic feels reasonable. And at each step, it redirects your attention away from the systems that are actually producing your financial condition. The labor market that has held real wages flat for 4 decades, the housing market financialized beyond reach, the healthcare system charging more for worse outcomes, the education system repriced beyond the wages it generates. There is one more layer to this that is most psychologically damaging: the way the Latte Factor attaches moral weight to consumption. Buying coffee is not merely a suboptimal financial choice. It is framed as a character flaw. It is evidence of insufficient discipline, inadequate seriousness about your future, a failure of self-control. This moral overlay is extremely effective at producing compliance, because most people respond to shame. But it also produces paralysis, self-blame, and financial anxiety, making clear-headed economic decision-making harder. Research on scarcity mindset showed that financial stress itself impairs cognitive bandwidth. Advice that amplifies financial shame without addressing structural causes does not solve the problem. It deepens it. I want to be precise about what I am and am not saying here. Your spending choices are not irrelevant. Conscious, intentional spending is worth practicing, not because cutting coffee will save you, but because knowing where your money goes gives you agency and clarity over choices within your control. What I am saying is that the financial advice industry has systematically overweighted behavioral variables and systematically underweighted structural ones. This imbalance has real consequences for real people who orient their financial self-improvement effort around habit optimization, while structural forces go unaddressed and unchallenged. So what do we actually do with this? The system as the problem is a satisfying insight, but can lead to paralysis. Understanding structural causes is not a permission slip to disengage from your own financial life. It is a reorientation of where your attention and energy are most efficiently directed. I want to offer something genuinely useful here, not because it solves the structural problem, but because it makes your navigation of that problem clearer and less emotionally costly. The first reorientation is to stop evaluating finances through small spending and start through fixed cost architecture. Your financial situation is largely determined by 4 numbers: what you earn, what you pay for housing, what you pay for debt service, and what you pay for healthcare. These 4 numbers determine how much room you have to maneuver. Everything else operates inside that space. If that space is very small, optimizing the spending inside it will produce very small results. The highest leverage moves involve reducing one of the 4 structural costs or increasing income. That might mean negotiating rent, refinancing debt, aggressively shopping insurance, or making a strategic career move. These moves are harder than cutting coffee. They require research, negotiation, risk tolerance, and sometimes a long runway. But they operate on the variables that actually determine outcomes. The second reorientation is about the relationship between margin and resilience. The financial concept the Latte Factor gestures at, but fails to name correctly, is the importance of a savings margin. Having money available for investment, emergencies, for opportunity is genuinely important. The research on this is unambiguous. People with even a small financial buffer make materially better financial decisions than those without one, because they are not constantly operating in scarcity mode. The goal of building that buffer is right. The means micromanaging coffee purchases is wrong. The buffer is built through structural moves, renegotiating fixed costs, capturing employer benefits fully, eliminating high-interest debt, which is the single highest return financial move available to most households, and building income through skills, credentials, or additional streams. The third reorientation is the one I want to spend the most time on, because it requires the most courage. The Latte Factor framework is effective in part because it asks nothing of you except personal modification. It does not ask you to have opinions about housing policy. It does not ask you to think about wage structures, or healthcare systems, or the political economy of student debt. It asks only that you examine yourself and adjust your behavior. This is comfortable. It is also incomplete. The structural forces that produce the gap between wage growth and cost of living growth since 1980 are not natural phenomena. They are the outputs of decisions, policy decisions, corporate decisions, regulatory decisions, made by people over time, often with specific beneficiaries in mind. The wage productivity decoupling is not a law of nature. It is the result of decades of labor policy that systematically reduced workers' bargaining power while protecting returns to capital. The housing affordability crisis is not an accident. It is the result of zoning policy, financialization of the housing market, and a failure of housing supply that was predictable and preventable. These things can be changed. They have been changed in other countries. They require political engagement, not just personal budgeting. I am not telling you how to vote or what political positions to hold. That is not the purpose of this channel. What I am saying is that any financial education framework that excludes the political and structural dimensions is incomplete. And a framework that actively redirects your attention away from those dimensions is doing you a specific disservice. The coffee is real. The coffee money does exist. Spending it consciously rather than unconsciously is reasonable. I am not here to tell you to buy the coffee defiantly as an act of resistance. That is just the other flavor of the same distraction. What I am here to tell you is that the coffee is a small variable in a large equation. And that equation includes housing costs, healthcare costs, wage growth, debt interest rates, and the policy environment. If you have been spending years of mental and emotional energy monitoring your small spending, while large variables went unexamined, I want you to know that this is not a personal failure. You were given a map that left out most of the territory. And now you have a more complete one. Buy the coffee or don't. That is a real choice, and it is yours to make. But know what it is and what it isn't. It is a small daily pleasure or a small daily saving. It is not the thing standing between you and financial security. That thing is larger, older, and more complicated than any beverage, and it does not live in a paper cup. That's it for today. If this landed differently than your usual finance content, I hope it's because it was trying to tell you something true rather than something comfortable. Share it with someone who has been quietly torturing themselves over small spending while bigger forces go unnamed. Subscribe if you want more of this. And I'll see you next week.